I've found myself rather interested in the era of comics just before I was born. So the late 80s to the early to mid 90s. I'm from 93, so some of it does overlap with when I was born. But I found this period in comic book history to be fascinating. It's where a lot of controversy seems to come from, where all the big changes we talk about seem to come from. I've recently bought the Superman Exiles omnibus on recommendation from a friend, and I'm not even halfway through because it's over 1,000 pages, but I'm loving it. It's just so strange. But while going through this little ramble of trying to find 80s and 90s material, I stumbled across a story I had vaguely heard of, and I think I should have heard more about it just based on what it is. It's 0 Hour Crisis in Time by Dan Jurgen with art by the amazing Jerry Ordwell. Seriously, I love Jerry Ordwell's art. He's a fantastic Superman artist. I absolutely love him. But 0 Hour Crisis in Time is sort of a sequel to Crisis on Infinite Earths. It's one of the Crisis lineup, where if you were to just call it 0 Hour, you wouldn't know. That's why it's got this little tagline, Crisis in Time. I stumbled across it quite randomly when looking at old Superman trades. I bought one that was Superman 0 Hour, and it turns out that was tie-in trades to this big event, so I went out and I managed to find it. I actually managed to find it really cheap in a really nice hardcover. But what's interesting about this is I think it really highlights how strange reading comics in that time was. It takes place not long after the events of Death and Return of Superman, and literally just after the Nightfall storyline. They make multiple accounts to Batman should have been bedridden. But it looks at DC continuity of the time. For example, Batgirl shows up, and everyone's incredibly surprised because, well, Batgirl was crippled by the Joker, she should be in a wheelchair. And at first when I saw that page, I thought, wait, maybe I've got this wrong, maybe Joker happened a while later, but then they pointed out, no, you should be bedridden. But I was reading this and it really brought to the forefront how hard it must have been to be a comic book fan at the time. Nowadays we have the internet, we have the ability to look up these stories, so anything that I got really confused over while reading this, I could just type into Google, or I just typed up 0 Hour into DC Wiki and looked through the story and went through the hyperlinks and went, oh, okay, so the Hunter they're referring to here is Rip Hunter. He's the same guy who's in that TV show that I haven't watched. Hal Jordan is this guy, and this is because of Emerald Twilight, but Emerald Twilight is because of something that happened in Death and Return of Superman. Just stuff like that. Like, can you imagine jumping in to this kind of continuity-rich storytelling in a world where you don't have the internet? It was quite something to realise. 0 Hour itself I really surprisingly enjoyed. Doesn't help that the hardcover copy I have kind of gives away a big spoiler about the real villain, which is kind of handy because when I ordered it off Amazon it had the old cover on there, so I was quite surprised to see it when it did get here. One thing I will point out, it has an absolutely excellent example of the relationship between comic book panels and time. This is explained wonderfully by Scott McCloud, and in fact I've been meaning to write an article on this. I did a short article about it when I was starting my master's degree, so almost 2 years ago. But that was 500 words, it was just a blog entry for a course. But it's something that I find really interesting. In fact, I was looking at the story Gwenpool the other day because someone recommended it, and I found a panel that also greatly explains what I want to go into there. And then the Flash, the DC Rebirth Flash, has some great panels, so I will talk about that at some point. But 0 Hour I really love. I love the writing. Dan Jurgens is a writer that seems to have definitely not lost his spark. I mean, most of my interactions with his work have been from the Rebirth stuff for Action Comics, and a few things from the 90s. I know he was involved with the Death and Return of Superman, with like Louis Simonson and some other people. But 0 Hour also made me very curious about some other characters I haven't really read about. Green Arrow. He played quite a large part when it came to Batgirl in here, and I've never really been interested in Green Arrow, but this was the story that made me go, oh, I may want to check out some Green Arrow. So if you have any recommendations for Green Arrow, please put them down below. But yes, this was a great read. I wouldn't say it was hugely important nowadays, but it's fun to go back and read, but you might want to keep a wiki article up on your desk. So what are you reading right now? Let me know below. Till next time.